What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2008 BMW X3. Today on the X3 behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace your rear brakes. In front of us, we have a kit which is available on fcpro.com, which includes Zimmermann rotors and Akebono pads, as well as a BOA brake pad wear sensor. To that kit, we went ahead and added some anti-rattle clips and some new set screws, as those do not come as part of the kit. There's a couple different options on there depending on what kind of brake pad compound you want. Today we're going with the ceramic along with the coated Zimmermann rotors. A few things to note when looking at replacing your brakes is what kind of condition they're in. Typically, we recommend that you do both the pads and the rotors at the same time if possible, and with our lifetime replacement guarantee, it makes it just a little bit easier to do so. You want to take a look at your rotors and see what kind of health they're in, see how rusty they are, see if they are developing a lip. You can run your fingernail across the front and back if you can of the rotor and see if you catch a lip on the inboard or outboard side of the disc. Moving forward, you can also take a look at how much pad life is left. There's tools out there, feeler gauges that you can use to measure, as well as the indicator light on the dashboard that will come on once the brake pad wear sensor is tripped. This is going to be applicable to all E83 models, but before we get started, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. And now for tools. For this DIY, we have two different size torque wrenches. We have a 1/2-inch drive and a 3/8 drive. Same thing with our ratchets. We also have a big hammer. We have two different size 16mm sockets for the 1/2-inch and 3/8 drive tools. We have a 6 and a 7mm hex bit socket, an 8mm socket. We have a caliper hook. We have our caliper piston compressing tool, small wire brush, small flathead. We have an electric ratchet and electric impact with a 17 for our lug bolts. And we have some liquid moly ceramic brake paste and some penetrating fluid. With that covered, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. Before we get started on this DIY, it's important to note the level of the brake fluid in your brake fluid reservoir. As you're compressing the pistons back in, the level is going to rise, so you want to make sure that you're not going to overpressurize the reservoir and cause a leak. If you need to, you can always remove some brake fluid with a syringe or turkey baster type tool. Obviously, you do not need to empty the reservoir. The idea is just that you leave enough room for fluid to travel as you compress the pistons back in. Now, our level is okay for now, so we're just going to keep an eye on it as we do the brakes. But let's go ahead and get started by doing these rear brakes. To get started, we have 5 17mm bolts to remove. We'll go ahead and zap those off. All right, we got the wheel off. I've hit that set screw with some penetrating fluid, so hopefully it's not seized up in there. But we'll start by removing that. We have our 6mm hex. I'm gonna go ahead and feed that into place. I'm gonna hit it with the hammer a couple times to break free any corrosion that may be binding it in there. That goes without saying, my good people, before you even start this job, make sure the parking brake is off, please, or you'll never get these rotors off. All right, next we're going to remove this anti-rattle clip. For that, take your flathead screwdriver, pry in the center against the rotor. You can kind of bring it towards you. Just like that. From there, you want to pop off the grommet over your brake bleeder valve. And then since we're replacing these sensors, we're just going to pull them out. But if you wanted to gently pry them out, you can use a small pick tool or flathead screwdriver and pry it out of the brake pad. I'm just going to yank them out as we're replacing them. We'll leave that for now. We'll cover installing the new one as we get to that point. And now I'm just going to clean up some loose debris, some loose rust, and just hit the rotors or hit the calipers with some brake clean, so that way when we have our fresh new hardware on here, we're not coating it with dirty, rusty fluid, and we don't really want to brake clean the new rotors either. So clean this up really quick. Now we're going to take our 7mm hex bit and remove both guide pins. I'm going to pry it out with the flathead screwdriver I have here. I'm just prying in between the brake caliper and the carrier bracket. I'll do the top one. The top one's a bit of a tight squeeze with the shock, but usually you should be able to get a normal 7mm hex in there with a ratchet. Now we can pop this caliper off the carrier. We're going to hang on to our inboard pad for just a moment. And we're going to use it in conjunction with our piston spreader tool, piston separator, piston compressor. And it's going to act as the backing plate so that we can compress our piston all the way in. Obviously, you do not want to do this with new pads, as you will ruin them. All right, once the tool bottoms out, the piston should be all the way in. Go ahead and pop that old pad off. Scrape off any loose brake dust or debris while you have it in your hand. Good old New England, baby. Now we can go ahead and just hang these off to the side. You don't want them to hang off the brake line. Now, using a 16mm socket on our breaker bar, you can go ahead and remove this caliper carrier. Try to zap it off with the electric ratchet if possible. Now we gotta get to the top one. I'm gonna have to move this caliper a bit. We can get a better view of that. Now this is temporary as I'm hanging it off the bracket that we are about to remove. All right, we're going to thread a lug bolt back into our hub here, and then we're going to go ahead and whack this rotor off as it's very seized to everything. Now with these back brakes, you want to be mindful that there's a slight chance they may be stuck to the brake pad shoes. You don't want to just destroy them off. You want to be mindful that you're not ripping the pads out either. There we go. Gently work it off. Now we can clean up our hub. Using a wire brush or emery cloth will work just fine, or a wire wheel on a drill. I just have a small wire brush. We'll hit it with some brake clean. Now we're gonna go ahead and apply some liquid moly ceramic paste to our hub so that our nice new fresh rotor does not seize. All right, that should keep our fresh rotor from seizing to the hub in the future. Now we're gonna try to handle it as best as possible without getting our greasy mitts on it. You don't really wanna break clean zinc coated rotors. Beautiful. Sometimes you'll need to adjust those parking brake shoes if it doesn't go on easily. That's not a big deal. Just make sure you adjust them in a bit or out depending on what you need. A little bit of paste on that set screw opening so it doesn't seize from behind. I'm just going to snug this down by hand, but if you wanted to follow along at home, 16 Newton meters is going to be your friend. And I like to encapsulate them in some paste so they don't rust from the front either. And take our caliper carrier, give it a little light wire brush where the pads are going to ride on, if you haven't done so already. Now we can go ahead and reinstall our carrier. We're just going to get these bolts started by hand first. I'm just going to go ahead and zap them in with the ratchet. Now we're going to go ahead and torque both of those 16 millimeter bolts to 65 Newton meters. A little blank there. All right. I like to put a little paste on the clips that go on the inside of the piston. Put a little bit of paste on the ears of the outboard pad as well. You also want to add a little bit of paste to the outboard inside portion of the caliper. Feed it back on. You can install our new retaining clip. Now we can get our guide pins started. Now we can install our guide pins. I went ahead and hit mine with the wire wheel real quick on the bench grinder, just to clean them up a little bit. At this point, it's totally dealer's choice if you want to grease these for install or not. I've always greased these. I've never had a problem with it. BMW doesn't require it, so totally dealer's choice. Just make sure if you use grease or brake pad paste, that's not going to be a type of material that's going to deteriorate the rubber boots. Go ahead and get these fed in. Now we'll grab our 7mm hex on our 3/8 drive ratchet, and we'll get these started nice and gently. With both of them snugged up, we're going to torque them down to 30 Newton meters. Then we can put our dust caps back on. And now we're going to want to go ahead and tackle the brake pad wear sensor. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, my good people, now all we have left to do is the brake pad wear sensor, which is only located on the rear right. As we remove the old one, I'm going to follow along with the new one, starting by just clipping this into the brake pad. They all have a notch that you just slip them into. Okay, that's clipped in. Remember to follow through the brake bleeder valve protecting boot here. Let's go ahead and clip that in there. Now we have a couple plastic clips to take care of. We have one on top of the wheel carrier that just lifts open. Pull it out. The brake pad cable or brake pad wear sensor cable has a couple notches cut out in it that are going to be dedicated to the clips that hold it in place. So it makes it nice and easy to align properly. Moving along, we have 2 more clips on our trailing arm. And it's going to swing behind the trailing arm. And now we're going to get underneath the car. We have a cover to remove so we can access the junction box where they plug in. We have 2 8mm bolts to remove underneath the back of the side skirt to access that junction box. There's 1. There's 2. Here's our box. We simply want to pop it open. Someone popped this open on the wrong side once. The tabs are up top. I know, silly design. Pull that out. Pull the rest of this old brake pad wear sensor through. 1 tab to depress. That pops out. There's 1 more clip right here, which we'll handle in just a moment. But we're going to reconnect a new sensor. Tuck it back into its forever home. Tuck the end of it back into this junction box. We'll close this baby back up. Like a little treasure box. Then up here we have 1 more clip. All right. Now with that all plugged in, we can put our cover back on with these 2 8mm bolts. Now with that all situated, we can lower the car back down and get our wheel on. Now we can go ahead and throw our wheel back on. We'll get our 5 17mm lug bolts started by hand. Then we can go ahead and snug them up with the electric impact. And now we can go ahead and lower it down on the ground and torque them up. Now we're going to torque all 5 down to 135 Newton meters or 100 foot-pounds. And there you have it, my good people. Another DIY in the books. Again, as I mentioned, we're only doing the passenger side for the video as that one has the brake pad wear sensor, but the driver's one is going to be identical. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave them in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.